Hi, I'm Olivia. My sister sat across from me at Sunday dinner, wearing a dress I paid for, and pointed a finger directly in my face. She said, "Let's be clear. You are a mental burden to this family. If you can't help us, get out. Just vanish." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me, and watched them stare at their plates in silence. They thought I was just a credit card with a pulse. They didn't know I was a security engineer who had already found the file they hid in my childhood bedroom. They had no idea that when you tell the person who controls your network to vanish, you don't just lose money, you lose access to reality. Before I initiate the shutdown, what time are you listening? And where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment. I read everyone. My name is Olivia Parker. I am 33 years old. I am a systems security engineer, which means my entire professional life is built around the concept of protecting things, identifying vulnerabilities, patching holes, and ensuring that the structural integrity of a network holds firm against anyone trying to break it down. I work remotely for a tech firm based in Austin, Texas, and I am very good at what I do. I am logical. I am precise. I am the person you call when things stop working, or when you are afraid they might. But the irony of my life, the devastating, quiet irony that I'm only just now beginning to articulate, is that while I spent my days building firewalls for strangers, I left the front door to my own life wide open. And the people who walked in and looted the place weren't hackers or thieves. They were the people sitting across from me at the dinner table. I want you to picture a standard Sunday evening in San Antonio. The air outside is thick and humid, that heavy South Texas heat that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. Inside my parents' house, the air conditioner is humming that familiar rattling drone I've known since childhood. The table is set. It's a nice table, mahogany, covered with a lace runner that my mother only brings out for special occasions or when Grace is home. And Grace was home. My sister, Grace, the golden standard, the future doctor. The sun is around which our family's entire planetary system revolves. She was sitting directly across from me, picking at a plate of roast chicken and glazed carrots. The conversation had been tight all evening, like a rubber band stretched just to the point of snapping. We were talking about money, or rather, I was trying to talk about boundaries, and they were talking about needs. Then the snapping happened. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a dramatic plate-smashing explosion like you see in the movies. It was quieter than that, and infinitely colder. Grace put down her fork. The metal clinked against the porcelain, a sharp sound that seemed to cut through the humidity in the room. She looked up, locked eyes with me, and pointed a finger directly at my face. Her hand didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. "You are a mental burden to this entire family." "Olivia," she said. She enunciated every syllable, as if she were diagnosing a terminal illness. "If you can't help us, then get out of our lives. Just vanish." I remember the silence that followed. It lasted for maybe 5 seconds, but in my memory, it stretches out for hours. I looked at my father. He was sitting at the head of the table, a man who had spent his life fixing cars, a man who knew how to repair things that were broken. He didn't look at me. He looked at his fork. He looked at the salt shaker. He looked anywhere but at his youngest daughter, who had just been told to disappear. I looked at my mother. She was wiping a non-existent crumb from the corner of her mouth with a paper napkin. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, "Grace, that's too far." She didn't say, "Olivia is our daughter, too." She just stared down at her plate, her face a mask of passive avoidance, as if I were a sudden, unpleasant noise static on the radio that wasn't worth the effort of tuning out. In that moment, the verdict was unanimous. The silence of my parents was a signature on the death warrant of our relationship. If they had yelled at me, if they had argued, it would have meant they cared enough to be angry. But this silence was erasure. It was an agreement. By saying nothing, they were confirming what Grace had said. I was a utility. And a utility that complains is a utility that needs to be discarded. I didn't cry. I think part of me expected to. I checked in with myself, like running a diagnostic on a server, looking for the error logs, looking for the tears. But there was nothing, just a cold, hard clarity. It was the temperature of absolute zero. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, dragging sound. I didn't push my chair back in. I didn't say, "Excuse me." I didn't say, "How dare you." I just turned around, walked to the side table by the front door, and picked up my car keys. The metal felt cool and jagged in my palm. "Olivia," my mother said then. Her voice was faint, not concerned, just confused, like she was wondering why the appliance was walking out the door. I didn't answer. I opened the front door, stepped out into the humid San Antonio night, and closed the door behind me. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a click. That click felt like the final period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. Walking to my car felt like walking on the moon. Gravity seemed different, lighter, weirdly unstable. I got into my sedan, tossed my bag on the passenger seat, and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. The warm yellow light spilled out from the dining room window. I could see the silhouette of Grace's head, still high, still righteous. I could see the slumped forms of my parents. They were probably already going back to their meal. The disruption had removed itself. Order had been restored. I merged onto I-35 North, heading back towards Austin. The drive is about an hour and a half, maybe a little less if the traffic is kind. It's a drive I have made hundreds of times. Usually, I make this drive with a sense of vague anxiety, worrying if I gave them enough money, worrying if I fixed the Wi-Fi correctly, worrying if I had said the wrong thing to upset the delicate ecosystem of their ego. But tonight, the highway was just a ribbon of concrete and light. The road noise was a comfort. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying the sentence in my head, over and over, analyzing it like a piece of malicious code. "You are a mental burden. Get out of our lives." It was funny, in a dark, twisted way. I was the one who paid for the groceries on that table. I was the one who paid for the repair on the air conditioner that was keeping them cool. I was the one who had just transferred $3,000 to my father's account last week because the shop was slow. I was the financial spine of that dinner, and yet I was the burden. The realization hit me somewhere near New Braunfels. It washed over me with the force of a physical blow, making me gasp for air in the quiet cabin of the car. I wasn't leaving because I was angry. I was leaving because, for the first time in 33 years, I understood the transaction. I had been paying for a seat at a table where I was never actually welcome. I had been buying a family that didn't exist. My parents didn't see a daughter when they looked at me. They saw a resource. They saw a tech support hotline. They saw a bank transfer. And Grace didn't see a sister. She saw a stepping stone. A stepping stone doesn't get to speak. A stepping stone stays on the ground, silent, while you walk over it to get to where you deserve to be. I turned on the radio, but I didn't hear the music. I just needed the noise to fill the void where my family used to be. I drove through the darkness, watching the miles tick up on the odometer, putting physical distance between myself and the people who shared my DNA. When I finally saw the skyline of Austin, the lights reflecting off Lady Bird Lake, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't relief, exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when a fever breaks. You're weak, you're shaking, you're exhausted. But the sickness is gone. I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment complex. I turned off the car. The silence rushed back in. But this time, it was my silence. It was the silence of my own space, my own life, bought and paid for by my own labor. I sat there in the dark for a long time. I told myself, if I stay away, I survive. If I go back, I disappear. That night, alone in my apartment, I didn't unpack my bag. I just stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. I was Olivia Parker. I was 33 years old, and I was an orphan. Not by death, but by decision. The severance had begun, but what I didn't know then, standing by that window, was that the cut was deep. But the infection was already in the blood. They had kicked me out. Yes, but they hadn't let me go. Not yet. The system was compromised, and I was about to find out just how deep the breach really went. To understand why I walked out of that house at 33, you have to understand the physics of the house I grew up in. Every family has a gravitational center, a sun around which the rest of the members orbit. In the Parker household, in that sturdy brick single-story home in the suburbs of San Antonio, the sun was Grace. It wasn't something we ever voted on. It wasn't written in a family constitution. It was just the atmospheric reality of our lives. From the time we were in elementary school, the air in the house seemed to circulate specifically to fill Grace's lungs. She was the firstborn, the prettier one, the one with the bright, easy smile that made adults want to give her candy. But more importantly, she was the smart one. And not just smart in a vague, general way. She was smart in the specific, prestigious way that working-class parents dream about. She was good at biology. She was good at chemistry. By the time she was a sophomore in high school, the narrative had been set in stone. Etched into the drywall of our living room, Grace was going to be a doctor. The Doctor, it became her surname. In conversations with neighbors, at church picnics, at the H-E-B grocery store checkout line, my parents didn't just introduce her as their daughter. They introduced her as our Grace, the future pediatrician, or our Grace, she's aiming for Baylor, you know. I watched this performance 1,000 times. I watched my father's chest puff out, physically expanding with pride. I watched my mother's eyes crinkle with a softness I rarely saw directed anywhere else. They looked at her like she was a winning lottery ticket they had somehow printed themselves. And then there was I. I wasn't the bad kid. I wasn't the rebel. I didn't sneak out. I didn't smoke behind the gym. I didn't fail my classes. I was just distinct. I was quiet. I was obsessed with the beige boxes of desktop computers, with the tangle of Ethernet cables, with the glowing green and white text of command lines. While Grace was memorizing the anatomy of the human heart, I was tearing apart old motherboards to see how the circuits connected. I spent my teenage years on forums, learning Python, and understanding how the internet actually worked. To my parents, this was alien. It wasn't prestigious. It was just a hobby that involved a lot of sitting. When people asked about me, the introduction was always a beat shorter, the tone a degree flatter. "And this is Olivia," my mother would say, her hand resting vaguely on my shoulder, usually guiding me out of the way of a conversation. She's good with computers. She does something with those servers and things. Something with servers. That was the summary of my existence. It wasn't said with malice, exactly. It was said with a profound lack of interest. It was the same tone one might use to say, "She's good at plunging toilets." It was a utility. A background function. Grace was the headline. I was the fine print. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was being conditioned. I was being trained, day by day, year by year, to accept a role that was less daughter and more support staff. This dynamic played out in the geography of our house. When Grace was studying for her AP exams, the house went into lockdown. "Shh, Grace is focusing," my mother would hiss if I turned the TV volume above a whisper. The kitchen table was her sovereign territory, covered in textbooks, highlighters, and flashcards. No one was allowed to disturb the future doctor. My parents would tiptoe around her, bringing her sliced apples and glasses of iced tea, treating her mental effort like it was a delicate surgical procedure in progress. But if I were working on a coding project, if I were deep in a complex problem, trying to troubleshoot a network error for a freelance gig I'd picked up online, "Olivia, the Wi-Fi is down again. Fix it, will you?" "Olivia, Aunt Sarah sent me an email, and I can't open the attachment. Come look at it." "Olivia, quit playing on that machine and come help with the dishes. Your sister is studying." That was the refrain of my adolescence. Your sister is studying. Her work was a career. My work was playing. Her time was sacred. My time was consumable. I remember one 4th of July specifically. I must have been 16. We had the neighbors over for a BBQ in the backyard. The heat was sweltering, the smell of charcoal and mesquite filling the air. Grace was holding court at the picnic table, wearing a crisp white sundress that somehow stayed spotless despite the ribs and potato salad. She was telling the neighbors about her summer internship at a local clinic, using big medical terms that made the adults nod in confused admiration. "It's just so rewarding to help people heal," she said, her voice lilting and sweet. "That's really my calling." "She's an angel," Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor, cooed, patting my mother's arm. "You two must be so proud." I wasn't at the table. I was inside, in the dark, humid kitchen. My father had yelled for me 5 minutes earlier because the playlist he had set up on his laptop had stopped working. The music died. "Olivia, fix it. People are waiting." There I was, debugging a driver issue on his ancient, grease-stained laptop, while outside, through the sliding glass door, I watched them toast to Grace. I could see them laughing. I could see the way the sunlight hit Grace's hair. I could see my father pouring her a soda with a flourish. And I felt invisible. Not lonely. Invisible. Like I was part of the infrastructure of the house, like the plumbing or the electrical wiring, necessary for the party to function, but not invited to the party. I fixed the music. Sweet Home Alabama started blasting through the outdoor speakers. Through the glass, I saw my dad give a thumbs up to the house, not even looking to see if I was standing there. He just knew it was fixed, because Olivia fixes things. I didn't go back outside. I stayed in the kitchen and washed the prep bowls. I wiped down the counters. I became the good girl in the only way I knew how, by being useful. See? I wasn't the failure of the family. That would have been easier. In a way, if you're the black sheep, at least you have an identity. You take up space, you cause friction. I was the beige sheep. I was the convenient child. I was the one who didn't need tuition money because I got scholarships. I was the one who didn't need new clothes because I didn't care about fashion. I was the one who didn't need attention because I was independent. My parents wore my independence like a badge of honor, but it wasn't a compliment. It was a relief to them. "Oh, we never have to worry about Olivia," they'd say. "She's self-sufficient." They didn't hear the silence in that statement. They didn't realize that self-sufficient was just a polite word for neglected. I learned to handle my own problems because whenever I tried to bring them to my parents, there was no room. The emotional bandwidth of the Parker family was entirely consumed by the highs and lows of Grace's journey. If Grace got a B on a test, it was a family crisis that required a council meeting. If I won a state coding competition, it was, "That's nice, honey. Can you check why the printer is jamming?" I retreated into my screens. The logic of computers was comforting. In code. If you write the correct syntax, the program runs. If you make a mistake, the system tells you exactly where the error is. It's fair. It's consistent. It doesn't play favorites. It doesn't care if you have a charming smile or a white coat in your future. It only cares if you are right. So I got very, very good at being right. I built a fortress of competence around myself. I told myself I didn't need their applause. I didn't need the toasts at the BBQ. I had my own world. But looking back, I see the tragedy of that 16-year-old girl in the kitchen. She was scrubbing dishes while the music played, waiting for someone to open the sliding door and say, "Come out here. Liv, we miss you." The door never opened. And as we grew older, as high school turned into college, the dynamic didn't change. It hardened. The future doctor became the medical student, and the costs associated with her dream began to mount. The pedestal they had built for her was getting expensive to maintain. And me. I was the one with the knack for fixing things. I was the one who was good with numbers. I was the one who was low maintenance. They say that children crave attention, and they will take negative attention over no attention at all. But I found a third option. I sought utility. I thought, if I can't be the star, I will be the stage crew. I will be the one who keeps the lights on. If I am useful enough, they will have to keep me around. If I am essential, they will have to love me. It was a dangerous calculation. It was the logic of a server maintenance protocol applied to a human heart. And it was exactly that mindset, that desperate need to be the good, useful one, that left me wide open for what was coming next. The financial bleeding didn't start all at once. It started with a drip, a request here, a favor there. And because I had spent my entire life training to be the convenient child, I didn't just say yes. I thought saying yes was the only way to prove I existed. When Grace was accepted into medical school in Houston, the family reacted as if we had been collectively canonized. There was a party, of course, balloons, cake, and a banner that read, "Dr. Parker, the journey begins." But the morning after the party, the hangover wasn't from champagne, it was financial. Medical school is not just an education, it is an economy. It is a beast that eats money. There is the tuition, which is a staggering number on its own. But then there are the invisible costs that swarm around it like gnats, the textbooks that cost $400 each, the specialized equipment, the diagnostic kits, the scrubs, the fees for board exams that cost as much as a used car, the travel for rotations. My parents owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of San Antonio, Parker's Auto and Body. It was an honest living. It paid the mortgage and put food on the table. But it was a cash flow business. When the economy was good, people fixed their cars. When the economy was tight, people drove on bald tires and ignored the check engine light. The shop made enough to support a blue-collar life, but it did not make enough to manufacture a doctor. I, on the other hand, had just landed my first serious role as a security analyst in Austin. I was making a tech salary. For a girl who grew up wearing hand-me-downs and fixing her own electronics, the numbers on my paycheck looked surreal. I had a surplus. I had a savings account that was actually growing. The first request was so small I didn't even think about it. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in my apartment, setting up a new firewall configuration for a client, when my mother called. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice tight with that specific stress she got when the monthly bills were piled on the kitchen counter. "Listen, the supplier for the shop just hiked the prices on parts, and your dad is a little short on the shop insurance this month. It's just a temporary cash flow thing. Could you cover $500? Just until the end of the month." "Of course. Mom," I said. I switched tabs on my browser, logged into my bank, and sent the money via Zelle before she even finished her sentence. It sent. "Oh, thank you, Liv. You're a lifesaver, really." That thank you felt good. It felt warm. It felt like I was part of the team. I was the responsible adult daughter helping her hardworking parents. I was useful. But the temporary cash flow thing didn't end. The next month, it was a transmission repair that a customer disputed. The month after that, it was property taxes. The requests were always framed as emergencies, as anomalies. But when an anomaly happens every 30 days, it's not an anomaly anymore. It's a pattern. Then, the focus shifted from the shop to Grace. I remember the call vividly. It was a Friday night. I was about to go out for dinner with some coworkers, a rare social indulgence for me. My phone buzzed. It was Grace this time. She was crying. "Liv, my laptop just died," she sobbed. "Blue screen of death. It won't turn on. I have a pathology exam on Monday. All my notes are on there. I'm going to fail. I am going to get kicked out." My stomach dropped. I knew that panic. "Okay, calm down. Did you back it up?" "I don't know. I think so. But I can't access it without a computer. Dad said they don't have the money right now to get me a new one until next week, but I need it now." I looked at my keys. I looked at the clock. "Go to the Apple store near the campus," I said. "Pick out what you need. I'll call them and pay for it over the phone." $2,000 later, Grace had a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro. She texted me a picture of it with a string of heart emojis. "You are the best sister ever. I promise I'll pay you back when I'm a resident." I told myself it was an investment. She's going to be a doctor, I thought. This is for her future, and when she makes it, she'll remember this. But the slope was slippery, and it was steep. The requests grew in frequency and magnitude. It wasn't just emergencies anymore. It was lifestyle maintenance for the future doctor. "Grace needs a better apartment. Liv. The one she's in is too noisy. She can't sleep before her rounds. There's a quiet complex nearby, but the deposit is $2,000. Grace needs to fly to Chicago for a conference. It's vital for her networking. Grace needs a prep course for the USMLE Step 1. It's $4,000, but it guarantees a high score." I became the silent partner in Grace's education. I paid for the prep course. I paid the deposit on the quiet apartment. I paid for the flights. Every time I hit transfer, I felt a little pinch of anxiety as my own savings stagnated. But I soothed it with the mantra of the good daughter I'm single. I have a good job. I can handle it. Helping family is what you do. I justified it by telling myself I was buying stability. If I paid for Grace, my parents wouldn't stress. If my parents didn't stress, they would be happy. If they were happy, maybe they would finally see me. But a subtle shift began to happen around the 1-year mark. The gratitude began to evaporate. The, "Oh, thank you so much, Liv," turned into, "Okay, got it." And then it turned into expectation. 1 month, I had a large car repair bill of my own, my transmission blew. When my dad called to ask for help with Grace's rent that month, I hesitated. "Dad, I'm actually a little tight this week," I said, feeling a strange guilt for even saying it. "My car is in the shop, and it's going to cost $1,200 to fix it." There was a pause on the line, a heavy, disappointed silence. "Well," my dad said, his voice dropping an octave. "Grace really needs this rent paid. Olivia, she has finals coming up. She can't be worrying about eviction notices while she's trying to study the cardiovascular system. Can't you put your car on a credit card or something?" I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, stunned. "Can't you put your car on a credit card?" I guess I can," I stammered. "Good," he said, the relief instant. "Please transfer it by tonight. The landlord is a stickler." He hung up. No, "How are you?" No, "Sorry about your car." No, "Thanks for making it work." Just the transaction. That was the moment the dynamic crystallized. I wasn't a benefactor anymore. I was a resource. I was a wallet with a pulse. My needs, my broken car, my savings, my life in Austin were secondary to the grand project of Grace. I transferred the money that night. I sat on my floor, eating instant ramen because I felt like I needed to save money after spending so much on them. And I looked at my banking app. The numbers were there, black and white, money in, money out, but the emotional ledger was deep in the red. I started to dread the ringtone of my phone. Every time I saw Mom or Dad or Grace on the screen, my heart rate spiked. It wasn't a notification of connection. It was an invoice notification. Grace needs. Grace has to have. It's for Grace. And the worst part? I let it happen. I didn't scream. I didn't say no. I was trapped in the prison of my own competence. I had shown them I could carry the weight, so they just kept adding bricks to the load. They didn't ask if my back was breaking. They just assumed that because I was still standing, I could take more. I was 26 years old, earning 6 figures, and I felt poorer than I ever had in my life. Not because I didn't have money, but because I realized my money was the only thing that made me visible to the people I loved. And then, just when I thought the pressure couldn't get any more systematized, Mark Ellison walked into our lives. If my family's demands were a chaotic storm, Mark Ellison was the architect who would build a pipeline to drain me dry, efficiently and professionally. The infrastructure of my exploitation was already in place, but until my 28th year, it lacked a formal philosophy. It was just a series of messy, ad hoc transactions driven by guilt and urgency. That changed the day my father brought home Mark Ellison. If my family were a vulnerable server, Mark Ellison was the malware that gained root access and rewrote the operating system. My father met him at a local small business owners mixer, one of those events where guys who own landscaping companies and auto shops drink cheap coffee and complain about taxes. Mark was a wealth management consultant from Dallas. I remember the first time he walked into our living room in San Antonio. He was a man composed entirely of beige and navy blue. He had slicked back graying hair, a firm handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He carried an iPad Pro in a leather case like it was the 10 Commandments. "Olivia," my dad said, gesturing to Mark as if presenting a prize. "This is Mark. He's going to help us optimize, get us ready for retirement, get the shop's books in order." That's it. Mark sat at the head of the dining table, my father's seat, and opened his iPad. He tapped the screen with a stylus, bringing up colorful pie charts and jagged line graphs that looked impressive if you didn't know what you were looking at. My parents sat on either side of him, leaning in, their faces rapt with attention. They looked like children listening to a bedtime story, terrified and hopeful all at once. The economy is shifting, Mark said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. Hard labor isn't valued like it used to be. The real money is moving into the digital sphere. We have to be smart. We have to leverage every asset the family has. Then, he turned his gaze to me. I was sitting on the sofa, laptop open, finishing up a security audit for a client. I hadn't really been paying attention until I felt the weight of the room shift. "And you," Mark said, pointing the stylus at me. "Your father tells me you're in tech, computers." "Information security," I said, not looking up from my screen. "I secure cloud infrastructure for enterprise clients." Mark chuckled. It was a dry, condescending sound. "Cloud infrastructure," he repeated, looking at my parents. "That means she works on the internet. Invisible work." He looked back at me. "Must be nice. Air conditioning, no heavy lifting." "You can work from anywhere, right?" "Hawaii, Paris, your parents' living room." "Technically, yes," I said, bristling. "But the hours are long and the stress is high. If I make a mistake, companies lose millions." Mark waved his hand dismissively. Sure. High stress." "But let's be honest. Olivia, it's not like fixing a transmission, is it? Your dad comes home with grease under his fingernails and an aching back. You come home. Well, you don't even have to leave home. It's flexible. It's liquid." He used that word liquid like a weapon. "See?" Mark said, turning back to my parents. "This is what I call the modern disparity. You two belong to the generation of sweat equity. You build things. You fix things. But the market rewards the digital generation with, let's call it, outsized returns for minimal physical input." My mother nodded slowly. "That's true," she murmured. "Liv makes more in a month than the shop clears in a good quarter, and she just sits there." "Exactly," Mark said, leaning back. "And that's great. We want her to succeed. But in a functioning family economy, we have to look at the flow of resources. If one member has been blessed with that kind of luck, that kind of easy, high-yield situation, it's only natural that the flow should move back toward the foundation, towards the people who built the launch pad." I stopped typing. The room went silent. Mark had just done something brilliant and terrible. In 3 minutes, he had reframed my entire career. My hard work, the late nights studying for certifications, the weekend shifts fighting DDoS attacks, the constant anxiety of uptime was no longer work. And it was luck. It was a fluke of the modern world. And because it was luck, it wasn't really mine. It was a windfall that I had a moral obligation to share. "Think of it like a tax bracket," Mark continued, his eyes glinting. "The high earners support the infrastructure. In this case, the infrastructure is your parents, and, of course, the investment in the future grace." My father cleared his throat. He looked at me, not with the usual desperation of needing a loan, but with a new, strange confidence. "Mark says we need to restructure how we handle Grace's residency costs. He says it shouldn't come out of the shop's operating capital anymore. It's too risky." "So where is it supposed to come from?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mark tapped his iPad again. "We need a dedicated family support stream. Since your income is, let's say, surplus to your actual survival needs, you should be covering the liquidity gaps. It's not charity, Olivia. It's balancing the scales." I looked at my mother. "Mom, you know I pay my own rent, my own insurance, my own student loans. It's not surplus, it's my salary." My mother looked at Mark, seeking guidance. Mark just smiled a tight, patient smile. "Olivia," he said softly, like he was talking to a slow child. "Your parents sacrificed their bodies to raise you. You're sacrificing, what, a few pixels on a screen. A slightly smaller number in a savings account that you don't even touch. Don't be greedy." "Don't be greedy," the phrase hung in the air. My parents looked at me with a sudden, sharp judgment. Mark had given them the language to express what they had probably felt for years. They worked hard. I worked easy. Therefore, my money was common property. From that day on, Mark became a fixture. He wasn't just an advisor. He was the auditor of my life. He would come over for dinner and ask casual questions that were actually interrogations. "So, Olivia, did you get that bonus you mentioned last month? How is the market treating your 401k? Up 12%. Fantastic. The shop's roof is leaking. He created a moral framework where my financial boundaries were framed as selfishness. If I said no to a request for $5,000, Mark would sigh and say to my father, "It's hard when the younger generation forgets where they came from, but we can't force her to care, Bob." And my father would look at me with wounded eyes, and I would crumble. I would write the check just to stop Mark from talking, just to prove I did care. Mark Ellison was a social engineer of the highest order. He knew exactly which buttons to push. He exploited the working-class insecurity of my parents and the guilt-ridden success of their daughter. He convinced them that I was an endless resource, a well that would never run dry. But the most dangerous thing Mark did wasn't asking for money. It was normalizing the entitlement. Before Mark, my parents asked for help with a hint of shame. After Mark, they demanded it with righteousness. They felt owed. I wasn't just helping out anymore. I was paying my dues. I was paying the luck tax for having a job that didn't break my back. I hated him. I hated the way he ate my mother's pot roast. I hated the way he patted my father's shoulder. But mostly, I hated that I couldn't argue with him. Every time I tried to explain the reality of my expenses, he would gloss over it with talk of family legacy and long-term vision. "You're investing in Grace," he would say, "and Grace is the retirement plan. When she's a surgeon, you won't have to worry about a thing. You're just bridging the gap. Olivia, be the bridge." I didn't want to be a bridge. People walk on bridges. People drive over bridges to get to somewhere better. But as I sat there, listening to him outline the budget for Grace's upcoming clinical rotations, a budget that relied 80% on Olivia's contribution, I felt the concrete settling around my feet. I was the bridge. And Mark Ellison was the toll collector. Over the next 3 years, the trickle of requests turned into a hemorrhage. The numbers stopped being casual, hundreds of dollars here and there, and started becoming structural. We weren't talking about fixing a flat tire anymore. We were talking about financing a life. It started with the USMLE, the United States Medical Licensing Examination. If you are not in the medical field, you might think this is just a test, like the SATs. You pay a fee, you bring a pencil, you bubble in some answers. I wish it were that simple. The USMLE is not a test. It is an industry. There is Step 1. There is Step 2 CK. There is Step 2 CS. Each registration fee is north of $600, but you don't just take the test, you have to prepare for it. And according to Grace, and by extension, Mark Ellison and my parents, you cannot prepare for the most important exam of your life with used books and a prayer. You need the Kaplan course, you need the UWorld subscription, you need the live lectures in Dallas. "She has to score in the top percentile, Olivia," my father told me over the phone, his voice serious, like a general discussing supply lines. "If she doesn't match into a good residency, all this, everything we've done, it's for nothing. We can't cheap out now." We. He said we. But the credit card on file for the $3,000 prep course was mine. Then came the clinical rotations. Grace had to travel to different hospitals, one in Galveston, one in the medical center, and one up in Temple. She needed gas money. She needed professional attire because her old clothes looked too student-like. And then, the biggest line item of all the apartment. Grace had been living with roommates, but during her 3rd year, she called home in tears. Her roommate was loud. Her roommate had a boyfriend who played video games until 2 a.m. Grace couldn't sleep. Grace was exhausted. Grace was going to fail because the environment wasn't optimized for her genius. So, the family council convened. Mark Ellison wasn't there physically, but his spirit was in the room. "We need to protect the asset," my mother said. "She needs her own space, a sanctuary." They found a sanctuary. It was a 1-bedroom apartment in a luxury complex near the Texas Medical Center. It had a gym, a pool, a concierge, and granite countertops. It cost nearly $2,000 a month. "I can't afford that," my father admitted, looking at the brochure. Then, 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. "It's just for 2 years," Grace said, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. She looked so tired, so fragile. "Once I'm a resident, I'll have a salary. I'll pay you back. Live. Every cent, I promise. Think of it as a loan. A high-interest loan." She laughed nervously. My parents smiled encouragingly. I did the math in my head. $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year, plus utilities, plus the internet. I looked at my savings account, the house fund. I had named it privately. It was sitting at a healthy number, a number I had scraped together by driving a 10-year-old Honda and cooking my own meals. "Okay," I said. "I'll cover the rent, but you pay the utilities." "Oh, thank you," Grace squealed, hugging me. My parents beamed. For a moment, the tension in the room vanished. I was the hero. I was the good sister. But the high-interest loan was a lie we all told ourselves to make the theft palatable. Every month, on the 1st, $2,000 are left in my account. I watched my house fund stagnate, then slowly start to dip as other emergencies popped up. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I repeated the mantra, "When she's a doctor, this all comes back. She'll be making $300,000 a year. She'll buy me a car. She'll pay off my mortgage. We are a team, but being on this team felt incredibly lonely." The disparity became most painful on social media. My mother had discovered Facebook, and she used it as a megaphone for Grace's glory. Every milestone was documented. Image of Grace in her white coat. "So proud of our future surgeon. She's working so hard for her dreams." 200 likes, 45 comments. "You must be so proud." What a blessing. She's going to save lives. Image of Grace at a gala. Our beautiful daughter rubbing shoulders with the chiefs of surgery. 150 likes. And where was I? I was in the background of the infrastructure. I was the invisible wire that kept the lights on in the picture. There were no posts about me. No, "So proud of Olivia for securing a major cloud contract." No, "Thank you to Olivia for paying the rent that allows Grace to sleep." My contribution was reduced to text messages. "Mom, rent is due tomorrow. Did you set the transfer?" "Dad, Grace's car needs new tires before she drives to Austin. Can you Zelle me $600? Grace, hey, short on grocery money this week. Whole Foods is expensive, LOL. Send $200. I would scroll through the comments on my mother's posts. What a wonderful family. A God has blessed you. And then switch to my banking app to pay the bill that made the photo possible. I was the producer of a show I wasn't allowed to star in. The breaking point, or rather, the moment the crack became too wide to ignore, happened when I was 30. I had been browsing Zillow for months. The Austin market was heating up, and I knew if I didn't buy soon, I would be priced out forever. I found a condo in East Austin. It wasn't fancy, it was a fixer-upper, small, with a view of a parking lot, but it was mine. I could afford the down payment if I stopped paying Grace's rent for 3 months. Just 3 months. I drove home to San Antonio for the weekend, armed with printouts of the condo and a spreadsheet. I felt a surge of excitement. This was my milestone. This was my white coat. And we were in the kitchen. My mom was peeling potatoes. Grace was home for the weekend, scrolling through her phone at the table. "Mom? Dad?" I started, laying the photo of the condo on the table. "I have some news. I'm thinking of putting an offer on this place in Austin. It's a great investment, and the interest rates are low right now." My mother stopped peeling. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and looked at the photo. She didn't smile. She frowned, confused. "Buy a house?" she asked. "Now?" "Yeah," I said, my smile faltering slightly. "I've been saving for years. I'm 30. Mom, I'm tired of renting. I want to build equity." Grace looked up from her phone. She looked at the photo, then at me. "But if you buy a house, you'll have a mortgage, right?" "Well, yes, that's how buying a house works." "And a down payment?" my father asked, walking in from the garage. "That's a big chunk of cash, Liv." "I have the cash," I said defensively, "but it means, well, it means I'll have to tighten up my budget. I won't have as much liquidity." The word liquidity hung in the air like a bad smell. They all knew what that meant. "So," my mother said slowly, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "You're saying you want to tie up all your money in a condo. Right now. When is Grace 6 months away from matching? When might she need to fly to interviews? When might we need to pay for moving costs if she moves out of state?" "Mom, I can't put my life on hold forever," I said, my voice rising. "I've been paying her rent for 2 years." "That's nearly $50,000. Isn't that enough?" My mother slammed the potato peeler onto the counter. The noise made me jump. "Enough," she snapped. "Is it enough? Olivia, we are at the finish line. We are so close. Grace is going to be a doctor. Do you understand what that means for this family? It changes everything. And you want to sabotage it because what? You want to play house." "I don't want to play house," I argued. "I want to own a home. I work hard. Mom." "We all work hard," my father shouted. "But some of us are working for the greater good. Buying a condo is selfish, Olivia. It's just for you. Grace's degree is for us." I looked at Grace. I waited for her to say, "No, let her buy it. She's done enough. I'll get a student loan for the last few months." Grace just looked at the table. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I mean," she said softly, "it would be really stressful if I had to move apartments right now, or if I couldn't afford to go to the good interviews. I might not match. And then, yeah." And she trailed off, leaving the catastrophic implication hanging there. If I bought a condo, Grace would fail. If Grace failed, the family failed. Therefore, if I bought a condo, I would be destroying the family. My mother sighed, picking up the peeler again. "Liv, honey," she said, her voice softening into that manipulative, disappointed tone. "Just wait. Wait until Grace is settled. Wait a year or two. The condos will still be there. Don't be impulsive. Don't trip your sister right before the finish line." I looked at the photo of the condo. It looked so small on the table, so insignificant compared to the monumental, shining edifice of Grace's career. I slowly pulled the photo back. I folded it in half, then in half again. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, I'll wait." "Good girl," my father said, patting my back. "Smart choice. Mark would agree. Keep your assets liquid." I drove back to Austin that night and threw the crumpled photo of the condo into the trash. I transferred the rent money to Grace's landlord the next morning. That was the day the illusion finally broke. I wasn't investing in a future where we all won. I was the fuel for a vehicle I wasn't allowed to ride in. My dreams were the kindling they burned to keep Grace warm. And the terrifying realization was that to them, this was the natural order of things. The satellite does not complain that it burns up in the atmosphere, so the spaceship can land safely. But even satellites eventually run out of orbit, and I was about to crash. The house was vibrating before I even opened my car door. From the street, I could hear the bass of the music and the dull roar of 24 voices competing for airspace. Parked cars lined the curb for 3 blocks, a testament to the magnitude of the event. This wasn't just a barbecue, it was a coronation. Grace had matched. The destination was Dallas, a prestigious residency program at a major hospital. The dream, the 14-year campaign that had consumed every ounce of energy and capital our family possessed, was finally, officially, a reality. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. The drive from Austin had been a blur of traffic on I-35 and my own spiraling thoughts. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and reached for the package on the passenger seat. It was a briefcase, but calling it a briefcase felt like an insult to the craftsmanship. It was full-grain Italian leather, a rich, deep cognac color that smelled of luxury and success. I had bought it 2 weeks ago, using money I made from a grueling freelance penetration test I did on top of my day job. It cost $600. I had imagined the moment I would give it to her, a symbol of her new professional life, a peace offering, a physical manifestation of my support. I wanted to say, I know I complained about the money, but look, I'm still here. I'm still cheering for you. I walked up the driveway, the box heavy in my arms. The front door was open. Inside, the living room was a sea of balloons. A massive vinyl banner was taped across the main wall. "Congratulations, Dr. Grace Parker, our future surgeon." The air smelled of brisket, cheap beer, and expensive perfume. I navigated through the crowd of aunts, uncles, and church deacons, forcing a smile that felt like it was glued to my face. "Olivia! You made it!" Aunt Linda shouted over the music, grabbing my arm. She had a plastic cup of wine in one hand. "Have you seen her? Have you seen our star?" "Not yet." "Aunt Linda," I said, shouting back, "I just got here." "She's glowing, honey, just glowing. Dallas." "Can you believe it? The Lord is so good." I nodded. "Yes, He is." I found my parents near the buffet table. My father was holding a beer, his face flushed with the kind of pride that makes a man look 10 years younger. He was telling a story to a group of neighbors, his hands animating the air. And I told her back, "Grace, you just focus on the books. We'll handle the rest. And look at her now, top of her class, matched in the first round." I walked up to them. "Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom." My mother turned. She was wearing a new dress, one I recognized from a charge on my credit card last week, Nordstrom, $180. She looked beautiful. "Oh, Olivia," she said, giving me a quick, one-armed hug, her eyes immediately darting back to the crowd. "Grab a plate. There's plenty of potato salad left." "Did you say hi to your sister?" "Not yet. I brought her a gift." I lifted the box slightly. "That's nice," Mom said, distracted. "Just put it on the table by the TV. She's swamped right now. Everyone wants a photo." I walked over to the corner table. It was already piled high with cards, gift bags, and bouquets of flowers. I found a small empty spot and set the leather briefcase down. It looked sturdy and serious amidst the glittery gift bags. I touched the leather one last time, feeling a pang of sadness. I knew, with sudden certainty, that she wouldn't open it tonight. I grabbed a beer and retreated to the edge of the room. I watched Grace. She was in the center of the living room, wearing a cream-colored cocktail dress, holding a glass of champagne. She looked radiant. She was laughing at something Uncle Mike said, throwing her head back, her hair catching the light. She looked like she belonged on that pedestal. She looked like a winner. And I stood in the shadow of a bookshelf, sipping lukewarm beer, feeling like the mechanic who had tuned the engine of the race car but wasn't allowed in the pit lane. Eventually, the music lowered, and people began to drift toward the dining room and the patio for food. The noise settled into a hum of chewing and chatting. I found a seat at the end of the long dining table, squeezed between a cousin I hadn't seen in 5 years and the wall. Grace sat at the head of the table, flanked by my parents. It was the Last Supper, but with more brisket. Uncle Joe, a boisterous man who owned a landscaping business, tapped his fork against his glass. All right, he boomed. "Let's have a toast to the girl of the hour, to Grace." "To Grace!" the room chorused. Glasses clinked. "But seriously," Uncle Joe continued, grinning. "Dallas, huh? That's big time. Big city, big hospital, and I bet, eventually, big checks." The table erupted in laughter. Grace smiled, swirling her wine. "So," Uncle Joe pressed, leaning in. "Now that you're going to be a fancy doctor, I guess the bank of Mom and Dad is finally closed. Right? You're going to be the one cutting the checks to pay them back for all those tuition bills." The laughter rippled again, but it was warmer this time. It was the standard kids owe their parents joke. My father chuckled, shaking his head with mock weariness. "Oh, we don't keep a tab, Joe. It's family." Grace took a sip of her wine. She set the glass down slowly. She looked at Uncle Joe, then at my parents, and then her eyes drifted down the length of the table. "You know," Grace said, her voice clear and melodic, cutting through the laughter, "it's not really about paying back. It's about teamwork." She paused for effect. The table quieted down to listen to the wisdom of the doctor. "I think," she continued, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips, "that every successful family needs a certain balance. You have the people who go out and conquer the world, and you have the support system. And honestly, Every family should have one person who is willing to sacrifice a little more without making a big drama out of it. You know, the quiet hero. As she said the words without making a big drama out of it, her eyes locked onto mine. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't a scowl. It was a look of serene entitlement. It was a look that said, I know what you did. I know you paid. But that was your job. And your job is to do it quietly. A chill ran down my spine, sharper and colder than anything I had felt in the air-conditioned room. It started at the base of my neck and radiated out to my fingertips. The room murmured in agreement. Amen, someone whispered. That's so true. Bless those quiet hearts. They thought she was praising me. They thought she was acknowledging my contribution. But I knew the code. I knew the encryption key to that sentence. She wasn't calling me a hero. She was calling me a subordinate. She was saying that my role, my purpose on this earth was to be the fuel for her engine. And worse, she was reprimanding me for the few times I had dared to hesitate. Without making a big drama. That was a reference to the condo. That was a reference to the times I asked when I would be paid back. To her, my desire for my own life was drama. My financial survival was an inconvenience to her destiny. I looked around the table. My parents were nodding, their faces soft with agreement. They didn't look at me, they looked at her. They accepted this philosophy completely. In the ecosystem of the Parker family, there were predators and there was prey. There were stars and there was gravity. I was the gravity. I was the dirt that held the roots so the flower could bloom. I looked down at my plate. The brisket suddenly looked gray and unappetizing. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. For years, I had told myself I was helping. I had told myself I was a partner. But partners have equity. Partners have a say. I didn't have equity. I was a tool. I was a wrench that you use to tighten a bolt and then toss back into the toolbox until something else comes loose. A tool doesn't get a thank you. A tool doesn't get invited to the gala. A tool just gets used until it breaks. I didn't storm out. I didn't flip the table. That would have been drama. And I was suddenly terrified of proving her right. I sat there. I took a bite of potato salad. I chewed. I swallowed. But something inside me had shifted. The tectonic plates of my loyalty, which had been grinding together for a decade, finally slipped. The earthquake was silent, deep underground, but it shattered the foundation. I looked at Grace one more time. She was laughing again, accepting a toast from Aunt Linda. She looked beautiful. She looked triumphant. Enjoy it, I thought, a voice in my head sounding strange, foreign, like cold steel. Enjoy the party, Grace. Because the ATM just went out of service. I finished my meal. I smiled when appropriate. I clapped when the cake was cut, but I didn't eat a slice. I felt full. I was full of a cold, hard truth that sat heavy in my stomach. When I left an hour later, I didn't say goodbye to Grace. She was too busy opening gifts. I saw her reach for a bright pink bag, ignoring the leather briefcase in the corner. I walked to my car, the night air humid and thick. I unlocked the door, sat in the driver's seat, and looked at the house one last time. The future doctor banner was slightly sagging on one side. I didn't cry on the drive back to Austin. I didn't play sad music. I drove in silence. My mind wasn't dwelling on the hurt anymore. It was booting up a new protocol. I am an engineer. When a system is compromised, when the root access has been abused, you don't beg the hacker to stop. You don't ask the virus to be nice. You isolate the threat. You revoke permissions. You purge the system. I didn't know yet how bad it was. I thought the worst part was the emotional betrayal. I thought the usage was just about the money I had already spent. I was wrong. I was so wrong. The breach wasn't just historical. It was active. And while I was driving away, thinking about boundaries, they were already busy crossing the final line. My apartment in Austin was silent. It was the kind of silence you pay a premium for double-paned glass, blocking out the hum of the city, the air conditioner whispering a steady, expensive breeze. I dropped my bag on the floor and didn't bother to turn on the lights. Outside my window, Lady Bird Lake was a ribbon of black glass reflecting the city skyline. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was mine. But as I stood there, looking at the view I had fought so hard to keep, I didn't feel peaceful. I felt haunted by the ghost of the party I had just left. Grace's voice echoed in the empty room, bouncing off the walls like a rogue signal without making a big drama out of it. I walked to my desk. This was my command center: 3 monitors, a mechanical keyboard, and a high-performance rig that I used to secure networks for Fortune 500 companies. In my professional life, I was a hunter of anomalies. I spent my days looking for patterns that didn't fit, for unauthorized data exfiltration, for leaks. I sat down. The chair mesh was cool against my back. I woke the computer. The screens flared to life, bathing the room in a blue glow. I didn't open my work email. I opened my banking portal. For years, I had treated my finances with a sort of deliberate negligence. I checked my balance, sure. I made sure I wasn't overdrawn. But I had never looked at the history in aggregate. I had treated every transfer to my family as an isolated incident, a single packet of data that didn't mean anything on its own, a tuition payment here, a rent check there, a repair bill. But data, when aggregated, tells a story that memory tries to edit out. I downloaded my statements for the last 6 years. I pulled them into a spreadsheet. I felt a strange, cold detachment. The same feeling I got when I was auditing a compromised server. I wasn't Olivia, the daughter, anymore. I was Olivia, the auditor. I started sorting. I created tags. Tag Grace. Tag parents. Tag shop. I went line by line. August 12th, $4,200. Tag Grace. USMLE prep. September 4th, $800. Tag shop. Parts for inventory. October 1st, $100. Tag Grace rent. October 1st, $300. Tag Grace utilities. November 15th, $1,500. Tag parents property tax. The rows went on and on. Scrolling down the screen was like descending into a deep, dark cave. The sheer volume of transactions was nauseating. There were hundreds of them. Some were small $50 for a celebratory dinner, and some were massive. I created a pivot table to sum the totals. I highlighted the cell at the bottom right. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and hit enter. The number appeared in bold black text: $124, $560. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked next to the number, mocking me. $124,000 in 6 years. That was a house. That was a fully funded retirement account. That was the freedom to quit my job and travel the world for 2 years. That was my life, converted into digits and transferred into the void of my family's expectations. My hands started to sweat. I felt a physical chill, a drop in core temperature that had nothing to do with the AC. It wasn't greed that made me cold. It was the realization of what that number represented. That number was the price of my membership in the family. I sat back, rubbing my temples. I tried to remember. In those 6 years, across those hundreds of transactions, how many times had the conversation started with, "Olivia, how are you?" How many times had they asked about my life, my stress, my dreams? I scanned my memory like I was searching a log file. Result not found. They called when they needed. They texted when the bill was due, when I visited. The conversation revolved around Grace's exams, the shop's struggles, and the family's image. I was never the subject of the sentence. I was the object. I was the verb, to give. I had become infrastructure. In the tech world, infrastructure is the most critical part of the system, but it is also the most invisible. You don't thank the server for delivering your email. You don't thank the fiber optic cable for carrying your video stream. You only notice infrastructure when it fails. When the server crashes, you scream. When the internet is slow, you curse. But as long as it works, it is silent, faceless, and assumed to be infinite. I was the Parker family server farm. I had 99.9% uptime. I had infinite bandwidth, and because I never crashed, they assumed I never overheated. I looked at the number again, 124 hours, $560,000. That wasn't support, that was a salary. I was an employee of my family, but I had no contract, no benefits, no equity, and no HR department to complain to. And the worst part, I was paying them for the privilege of working there. I didn't cry. The time for crying had been at the party, or maybe 5 years ago. Now, in the blue glow of my monitors, I just felt a hardening, a calcification. I saved the file. I named it the cost XLSX. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a long time, watching the headlights of cars moving on the bridge over the lake. They looked like blood cells moving through a vein. Life was moving on. And for the first time, I decided I was going to move with it, but on a different trajectory. The test came 3 days later. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a video conference with a client in Seattle, discussing a vulnerability in their payment gateway. My phone buzzed on the desk. Dad calling. I ignored it. It buzzed again immediately. Dad calling. My father never called twice in a row unless someone was dead or something was broken. I apologized to the client, muted my microphone, and turned off my camera. I picked up the phone. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice flat. "Liv, thank God," my father breathed. He sounded out of breath, stressed. "Listen, big problem at the shop. The main hydraulic lift just seized up. It's got a customer's truck stuck 6 feet in the air. We can't get it down. I have to replace the motor and the hydraulic pump immediately." "Okay," I said. And the supplier won't ship the part without payment up front. We're still waiting on those checks from the insurance jobs last month. I need $4,000. Liv, just for a week. I have to get this truck down today, or the guy is going to sue me. The script. It was so perfect. It could have been written by AI. Crisis plus urgency plus just for a week equals transfer. My finger hovered over the banking app on my phone. It was muscle memory. It would take 10 seconds. I could send the money. He would say, "You're a lifesaver." And I could go back to my meeting. The friction would be gone. The server would stay up. But then I saw the spreadsheet in my mind. $124, $560, $100. I saw Grace's face at the party, without making a big drama. I looked at the mute icon on my computer screen. My client was waiting. My actual job, the one that paid me, was waiting. "Dad?" I said. "Yeah. Hurry, honey, I have the guy on the other line." "I can't." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of a dropped call. It was the silence of a collision. "What did you say?" he asked. His voice had changed. It wasn't frantic anymore. It was low, confused. "I said I can't," I repeated. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice was steady. "I don't have it." "What do you mean you don't have it?" he snapped. "You get paid on the 15th. I know when you get paid." "I don't have it for this," I said. "I have bills, Dad. I have expenses. I can't transfer $4,000 right now." "Olivia, this is an emergency. A truck is stuck in the air." "I understand," I said. "That sounds like a business problem. Maybe you can use the shop's credit line, or ask the bank for a bridge loan." "I'm asking you." He shouted, "Why are you being difficult? Grace never gives me this kind of attitude." The name acted like a trigger. "Grace," I said, "has never given you a dime. Grace is the reason you don't have reserves, Dad. But that's not the point. The point is, I cannot be the shop's insurance policy anymore. I'm sorry. You have to figure this one out. Olivia, if you hang up, I have to get back to work. Dad, I have a client. Don't you dare." I pressed the red button. The call ended. I sat there, staring at the phone. My hand was shaking. I felt like I had just cut the red wire on a bomb. I expected the world to explode. I expected the sky to fall. But nothing happened. The AC kept humming. The traffic on the bridge kept moving. The little green light on my webcam blinked, waiting for me to return. I unmuted my microphone. I turned my camera back on. "Apologies," I said to the client in Seattle. "I had a minor infrastructure issue. It's resolved now. Let's proceed." I went back to work, but deep down, I knew the issue wasn't resolved. I had just initiated a denial of service attack on my own family. I had broken the contract. And I knew, with the certainty of an engineer who understands system dependencies, that the backlash wouldn't be emotional. It would be systemic. I had stopped the flow of money. Now, I had to wait and see what they would do to turn it back on, and I didn't have to wait long. The silence that followed my refusal to send $4,000 was not the peace I had hoped for. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness of a held breath. For 3 weeks, my phone didn't ring. No guilt-tripping texts from my mother. No just checking in messages from Grace. No angry voicemails from my father. At first, I told myself this was a victory. I told myself they were finally respecting the boundary, that they were figuring it out on their own like capable adults. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra tickets, scrubbing code, and trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in my gut that said it is never this quiet before a storm. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived in a standard white envelope with a cellophane window and a simultaneous ping in my inbox. I was standing in my kitchen, brewing coffee, when the email notification slid across my phone screen. Subject: Urgent Notice of Default. Account ending in 8842. From Lone Star Regional Bank, Dallas. I frowned. I didn't bank with Lone Star Regional. I didn't have an account ending in 8842. My first instinct was professional dismissal. Phishing attempt, I thought. Classic social engineering. Create urgency, induce panic, and get the user to click a malicious link. I see these attempts a dozen times a day at work. I usually just flag them and delete them, but something about this one made me pause. Maybe it was the Dallas in the bank's name. Maybe it was the specific, formal dryness of the preview text. I sat down at my desk and opened the email in my secure sandbox environment, a virtual machine I used to detonate potential malware without risking my main system. I analyzed the header information. The DKIM signature was valid. The SPF record passed. The sending domain was legitimate. This wasn't a spoofed email from a hacker in a basement in Eastern Europe. This was a genuine automated dispatch from a brick-and-mortar bank in Texas. I opened the attachment. It was a formal letter, addressed to Olivia Marie Parker. Dear Ms. Parker, this letter serves as a formal notice that your home equity line of credit HELOC account is currently 60 days past due. The total amount currently due to bring the account current is $4,250. Failure to remit payment within 10 days will result in the acceleration of the full loan balance of $350,000 and the initiation of foreclosure proceedings on the collateral property. I read the paragraph 3 times. The words floated on the screen, refusing to assemble into a coherent reality. Home equity line of credit, $350,000, collateral property. I don't own a home, I said aloud to the empty room. My voice sounded thin, wobbly. I grabbed the physical mail I had brought in earlier and tossed it on the counter. There it was, the matching hard copy, same bank logo, same terrifying numbers. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, erratic rhythm. This was a mistake. It had to be a mix-up, a database error, someone with a similar name. I called the number on the letterhead. Not the number in the email. Never trust the email number, but the one listed on the official Lone Star Regional Bank website. Lone Star Regional. This is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you? Hi, I said, my hand gripping the phone so hard my fingers hurt. My name is Olivia Parker. I received a default notice for an account I don't have. I think there's been a mistake. One moment. Ms. Parker, let me pull up your file. Can you verify your Social Security number? I hesitated, but this was the bank. I gave her the number. Thank you, she said cheerfully. Okay, I see the account here. A home equity line of credit opened 14 months ago. The total draw is $350,000. It looks like the interest-only payments were being made automatically until 2 months ago, but the funding source for the auto-pay, a checking account ending in 4490, returned the last 2 drafts as insufficient funds. I closed my eyes. Jennifer, I did not open this account. I don't own a home. I rent a condo in Austin. I have never been to your bank. There was a pause on the line. The clicking of a keyboard stopped. Well, Jennifer said, her voice shifting from customer service bright to cautious. The loan is secured by the property at 402 Maplewood Drive, San Antonio, Texas, and the primary borrower is listed as Olivia Marie Parker. The air left my lungs. 402 Maplewood Drive. That wasn't my house. That was their house, my parents' house, the house I grew up in, the house I walked out of 3 weeks ago. That's my parents' address, I whispered. Okay, Jennifer said slowly. And are you saying you didn't authorize this loan? I'm saying I didn't sign anything. I didn't apply for anything. How is this even possible? How can I take out a loan on a house I don't own? Well, according to the file, you are a co-owner of the property. A quitclaim deed was filed just before the loan application, adding you to the title. And then the HELOC was taken out against the equity. The room spun. I had to grab the edge of my desk to keep from falling out of my chair. Can you? I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Can you send me the application documents? The signature page? I can secure an email for them to you right now, she said. Ms. Parker, if this is fraud, you need to know that based on the documentation we have, this looks very legitimate. We have copies of your driver's license, your social security card, and your wet signature notarized. Send it, I said. 2 minutes later, a PDF arrived in my inbox. I opened it. I zoomed in. There it was. My name. Olivia Marie Parker. There was my signature. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was terrifyingly close. It was the way I signed things 5 years ago, a little loopier on the P. It was the signature from my college ID. And there were the supporting documents. A copy of my Texas driver's license, a scan of my social security card, the birth certificate. I stared at the screen, my brain trying to process the impossible geometry of the betrayal. This wasn't a hacker in Russia. This wasn't a data breach at Target or Equifax. The person who did this had physical access to my life. I looked at the date on the application. 14 months ago. 14 months ago. I was in Seattle for a cybersecurity conference. I remembered that week vividly because I had lost my phone at the airport. I wasn't even in Texas, but my data was. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel back to 402 Maplewood Drive. I walked through the front door, past the living room where the future doctor banner hung, down the hallway to the back bedroom, my old room. When I moved to Austin, I took my clothes and my computer. But like so many young adults, I had left a safe box behind. It was a plastic bin shoved deep in the back of the closet, under old yearbooks and winter coats. Keep this safe for me. Mom, I had said. It has my birth certificate, my passport records, my old tax returns. I don't want to lose them in the move. Of course, honey, she had said. It'll be right here. I opened my eyes. The realization hit me with the force of a physical punch to the gut. It wasn't a metaphor. I felt winded. They hadn't just asked for money. They hadn't just guilted me into paying rent. They had gone into my room. They had pulled out the box. They had taken my identity, the very core of who I was in the eyes of the law, and they had sold it to a bank in Dallas to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. $350,000. Where did it go? I looked at the transaction history Jennifer had sent. Transfer to Grace Parker, transfer to Ellison Wealth Management, transfer to Parker Auto Body, payment Mercedes-Benz of Dallas. They had liquidated my future to pay for their present. And they had done it over a year ago. Every time I visited, every time I sat at that dinner table and listened to Mark Ellison talk about family sacrifice, they knew. They were sitting on a $250,000 secret. They were looking me in the eye, eating the food I paid for, while my credit score was being hollowed out like a pumpkin. Ms. Parker, Jennifer's voice came through the phone, tinny and distant. Are you still there? I'm here, I said. My voice sounded different now. The tremble was gone. It was replaced by the flat, metallic tone of a system administrator who has just identified a critical breach. Ms. Parker, do you want to initiate a fraud claim? I have to warn you, if the people who did this are related to you, this becomes a criminal matter. We will have to involve the police. She said it gently, giving me an out. She was giving me the option to say, Oh, wait, maybe I forgot. She was giving me the option to eat the debt to save my family. I looked at the signature on the screen. It looked so much like mine, but it wasn't mine. It was a forgery committed by the hands that had held me when I was a baby. "It is a criminal matter," I said. "This is identity theft." "Okay," Jennifer said. "I'm opening a case file. You will need to file a police report and send us the case number within 24 hours to freeze the foreclosure." "I will. And Miss Parker, I'm sorry." "Me too," I said. I hung up the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The sun was setting, turning the water into a sheet of copper. The insider threat. Insecurity. It is the most dangerous vector. You can build walls 10 miles high to keep out the strangers, but those walls are useless if the person with the keys decides to burn the house down from the inside. My family was not just toxic, they were criminals. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. I opened a new folder on my computer. I named it Evidence. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't a sister. I was the victim of a high-value financial crime, and I was about to become the lead investigator. The sadness was still there, heavy and suffocating, but it was being pushed down by a new, sharper emotion. Rage, cold, calculated, forensic rage. I picked up my phone. I saw a text from my mother, sent 5 minutes ago. "Mom, Olivia, are you there? Dad is really worried about the shop. Please call us. We love you." I stared at the words. "We love you." "No," I said to the empty room. "You don't." I didn't reply. I took a screenshot of the text, and I dragged it into the evidence folder. Then I reached for my keys. I had to go to the police station. And I had to do it before I lost the nerve to treat my own parents like the felons they were. The police station in Austin was brightly lit and smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I spent 2 hours there, explaining to a young officer named Martinez why I was filing an identity theft report against people with the same last name as me. He took notes, his face a mixture of professional neutrality and pity. When I walked out with the case number written on a small blue card, I felt lighter but also terrified. I had just pulled the pin. The grenade was live. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone was vibrating so hard it was dancing across the surface of my desk. 15 missed calls, 7 from Dad, 5 from Mom, 3 from Grace. They knew. The bank had likely called the home number listed on the account their number to notify them that the fraud investigation had been opened and the accounts frozen. I sat down in my chair. I took a deep breath. I put the phone on speaker and hit accept on the next incoming call. It was my father. "Hello," I said. I expected denial. I expected confusion. I expected, perhaps, a desperate apology. "What the hell is wrong with you?" my father screamed. His voice was so loud that it distorted the speaker. "The bank just called. They said the account is frozen. They're talking about police. Why didn't you just make the payment? Olivia, why did you let it get this far?" I blinked. The sheer audacity of the question took my breath away. He wasn't asking why I had reported fraud. He was asking why I hadn't serviced the debt of the fraud. "The payment?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You mean the payment on the $350,000 loan you took out in my name without telling me?" "We didn't do it without you," he sputtered. "We did it for you. It's your equity. It's your contribution." "Mark said—" "I don't care what Mark said." I cut him off. "I want the documents, Dad. Send me everything, the loan application, the disbursement records, now, or I hang up and block this number forever. Olivia, listen. Send them. Now." There was a muffled curse on the other end, then a rustling sound. "I'm sending pictures of the file," he grunted. "Mark left a copy here, but you are blowing this way out of proportion. You are going to ruin everything." My phone chimed. A series of photos landed in my WhatsApp. I opened them on my monitor. It was worse than I thought. It was a manifesto of entitlement. I saw the family financial strategy document, prepared by Ellison Wealth Management. It laid out the plan in bullet points that were chilling in their simplicity. Objective secure funding for Grace Parker's residency transition and retire high-interest student debt. Vehicle home equity line of credit, HELOC on 402 Maplewood, primary borrower, Olivia Parker, reason high credit score, debt-to-income ratio, optimal. Repayment strategy, interest-only payments covered by Parker Auto Body's cash flow. Balloon payment to be refinanced upon Grace Parker's attainment of attending physician status est. 4 years, note Olivia, to assume liability to protect Grace's credit profile for future practice loans. I read it again. Olivia to assume liability to protect Grace's credit profile. They had deliberately, strategically decided that my credit was expendable. They treated my financial identity like a blast shield, something designed to take the hit so the precious cargo remained undamaged. "Do you see it?" my father asked, his voice still aggressive, but with a tremulous undercurrent of fear. "It's a plan, Olivia, a solid plan. Mark said that since you have that tech job, your income could absorb the risk. We were going to pay the interest. We just fell behind the last couple of months because the shop was slow." "You forged my signature," I said. "You stole my identity. That is a felony. Dad, that is prison time." "It's not stealing," my mother's voice chimed in from the background, high and shrill. "It's family money." "That house is our house. We just used your name because the bank wouldn't give it to us. We did it for the family." "I am not the family," I shouted, finally losing my cool. "I am a person. I am a separate human being. You can't just use me like a credit card. Grace needs this." My mother sobbed. "She has loans. She is stressed. Why are you so selfish? You have so much. Olivia, you sit there in your fancy apartment with your 6-figure salary, and you begrudge your sister a chance to breathe." "My salary," I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You think my salary covers a $350,000 debt? Do you have any idea what this does to me? I can't buy a house. I can't buy a car. If my company runs a background check and sees a default, I could lose my security clearance. I could lose my job." "You won't lose your job," my father scoffed. "You're smart. You'll fix it. You always fix it. Just call the bank, tell them it was a misunderstanding, and pay the $4,000 to bring it current. We'll pay you back next month. I promise. We'll pay you back next month." The lie was so old, so worn out, it didn't even have the power to hurt anymore. It just disgusted me. "No," I said. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. I am not paying for it. I am not calling the bank to smooth this over. I have already filed a police report for identity theft. I have already given the case number to the bank fraud department. The investigation has started." Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Then, Grace's voice came on the line. She must have been listening on the extension. "Liv," she said. Her voice wasn't imperious now. It was small, trembling. "Liv, you can't. If there's a police investigation, if they find out Mom and Dad did this, it will be public record. The medical board, they do background checks. If my family is involved in financial fraud, Liv, I could lose my residency match. They could rescind my offer." There it was. The trump card. The nuclear option. Protect Grace. "You should have thought of that," I said, my voice shaking. "You should have thought of that before you let them use my name. You knew, didn't you, Grace? You knew where the money for your apartment came from. You knew where the money to pay off your student loans came from." I didn't know the details," she stammered. "I just knew Mark had a plan. I thought you agreed. I thought you were helping." "You thought I agreed to take on a mortgage worth 3 times my annual savings without ever signing a paper. You thought I agreed to put my neck in a noose so you could live debt-free." "I thought you loved me," she cried. "I thought you wanted me to succeed." "I did love you," I said. "I loved you so much. I spent $120,000 of my own money on you, but this isn't love. Grace, this is harvesting. You harvested me." "Liv, please," my father begged, his bluster gone. "Stop the investigation. We'll sell the shop. We'll sell the house. We'll fix it." Just don't let the cops come." "The shop is already leveraged," I said, looking at the documents. "Mark took loans against that too, and the house is the collateral for the loan you stole. You don't own anything to sell. Dad, you spent it all." "Liv, I'm hanging up now," I said. "Do not call me again. My lawyer will be in touch." "Olivie." I ended the call. I sat there in the silence of my apartment. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. They had constructed an entire alternate reality where I was a willing participant in my own destruction. They had cast me in a play I never auditioned for, and now they were angry that I was refusing to read the lines. "Because you're smart, you'll fix it." That was the curse of my life. My competence was their weapon. They assumed I was invincible, so they felt justified in shooting me. I looked at the folder on my computer screen. Evidence. I added the photos of the financial strategy document to the folder. I wasn't going to fix it. Not this time. This time, I was going to let it break. I was going to let the whole rotten structure collapse, even if it meant watching my family get buried in the rubble, because the alternative was letting them bury me. I stood up and walked to the door. I locked the deadbolt. Then I engaged the chain lock. It was a small gesture, meaningless against the scale of the financial violence they had committed, but it made me feel safe. I was alone, but for the first time, being alone didn't feel like rejection. It felt like fortification. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours between midnight and dawn doing what I do best: documentation. In the world of cybersecurity, if it isn't logged, it didn't happen. I built a timeline. I cross-referenced the dates on the bank documents with my own calendar, my travel receipts, and my credit card statements. I built a case file that was tighter than any audit I had ever performed for a Fortune 500 client. The next morning, at 9:00 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in the office of Karen Miller. Karen was not the kind of lawyer you see on billboards next to the highway. She didn't have a catchy slogan. Her office was in a quiet building in North Austin, filled with stacks of files and the smell of old paper. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes behind reading glasses and a demeanor that suggested she had seen every possible variation of human greed. I handed her the USB drive containing my evidence folder. I walked her through the timeline. I showed her the fake signature, the family financial strategy document, and the text messages from last night. She listened in silence. She flipped through the printed pages, her face unreadable. Occasionally, she would circle something with a red pen. When I finished, there was a long silence. I sat there, gripping my purse, waiting for her to tell me I was cruel, waiting for her to say, "But they're your parents. Surely we can work this out." Instead, Karen took off her glasses and looked at me. "Olivia," she said. Her voice was surprisingly soft, but heavy. "You have an airtight case for identity theft and fraud. The evidence is overwhelming, but that's not the hard part." "What's the hard part?" I asked. "The hard part is that you have been training them to do this to you for a decade." I flinched. "Excuse me, you didn't sign the loan papers," she said, tapping the file. "But you signed a social contract with them a long time ago. You taught them that your boundaries were suggestions, not walls. You taught them that your money was a community resource. You let them cross the line 100 times with small things. So to them, this wasn't a crime. It was just the next logical step. It was just a bigger withdrawal from the account you had already given them access to." Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say, I was just being a good daughter. But the words died in my throat. She was right. The HELOC wasn't an anomaly. It was an escalation. It was the final level of a game I had been playing since I was 16 years old, fixing the Wi-Fi while they praised Grace. "So," Karen continued, putting her glasses back on, "the legal question is simple. Do you want to stop the game? Because stopping it means blowing up the board. It means criminal charges. It means your parents could lose their home. It means your sister's career could be impacted by the scandal. There is no quiet way to fix a $350,000 felony." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. I thought about the future doctor banner, I thought about my father's face when he told me I was lucky. I thought about Grace's lecture at the dinner table about drama. "I don't want to hurt them," I whispered. "You aren't hurting them," Karen said firmly. "They hurt themselves when they picked up the pen and forged your name. You are just deciding whether or not to let them drag you into the grave with them. So, Olivia, are you the defendant? Or are you the plaintiff?" I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt thin, sharp. "I am the plaintiff," I said. "Good," Karen said. She opened her laptop. "Then let's go to work." The next few weeks were a blur of procedural violence. The bank's fraud investigation unit was a machine. Once I formally disputed the debt and provided the police report, the gears started turning. They demanded the original wet signature documents. They subpoenaed the IP logs from the online application submission. They requested security footage from the notary public who had stamped the forms. I treated the investigation like a project manager. I didn't wait for the bank to find the truth. I served it to them on a platter. The application had been submitted online on March 14th of the previous year. I pulled up my travel records. March 14th, I was in Seattle at the CloudSec conference. I printed my boarding passes. I printed my hotel folio. I printed the email confirmation of my badge pickup. I even found a photo of myself on the conference's official Instagram page, time-stamped on that day, standing in front of the Space Needle, Exhibit A, the alibi. Then, I looked at the IP address used to submit the application. It was an IPv4 address from a residential ISP in San Antonio Spectrum Residential. I ran a tracer route. It resolved to the node serving my parents' neighborhood. Exhibit B, the location. Then came the notary. The loan documents required a notary seal. I looked up the name on the stamp, Barbara Jenkins. I searched for her. She was a mobile notary in San Antonio. I called Karen. "We need to depose the notary," I said. "If my parents forged my signature, someone had to witness it." Karen made the call. It turned out Barbara Jenkins was an old friend of Mark Ellison. When pressed by the bank's investigators, her story crumbled. She admitted she hadn't actually seen Olivia sign the papers. Mark and my father had brought the documents to her, claiming I had signed them earlier and was too busy to come in person. She had stamped them as a favor. That was the nail in the coffin. The bank called me on a Tuesday. "Ms. Parker," the investigator said, "we have concluded our preliminary review. Based on the evidence, specifically your proven presence in Seattle and the irregularity with the notary, we have determined that the debt was incurred fraudulently. We are removing the liability from your credit report effective immediately." "Thank you," I said. I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked me over. "However," the investigator continued, his voice hardening, "because the amount exceeds federal thresholds, and because the funds were dispersed to accounts belonging to Robert and Linda Parker, we are required to refer this matter to the District Attorney's Office for prosecution. We will also be pursuing civil recovery against the collateral property." "I understand," I said. "Are you prepared to testify if this goes to trial?" I closed my eyes. I saw my father's hands, grease-stained, holding me when I was a kid. I saw my mother baking cookies. Then I saw the spreadsheet, $124,560. I saw the signature that wasn't mine. I saw the text, "We just used your name." "Yes," I said, "I am prepared." I hung up the phone. It was done. The shield was up. The firewall held. I sat back in my chair. I should have felt triumphant. I had won. I had protected my future. I had saved my name. But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor of a natural disaster, standing on the roof of my house, watching the floodwaters swallow everything I used to know. My phone started ringing again. It was my mother. I didn't answer. I didn't block it, but I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I knew what was coming next. The panic, the bargaining, the guilt. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their anger. I had used my skills, my ability to analyze, to trace, to document, not to serve them, but to save myself. I opened my email and sent a short message to Karen. "Update, the bank has cleared me. The DA is involved. I am ready for the next steps. No settlements, no family arrangements. Everything goes through you. I hit send. I was no longer the convenient child. I was the witness for the prosecution, and I was finally terrifyingly free. The realization that the game was over didn't hit my family all at once. It seeped in like water into a sinking ship, slow at first, then catastrophic. For the first few days after I spoke to the bank's fraud unit, there was a strange, vibrating silence. I imagined them at the house in San Antonio, sitting around that mahogany dining table, Mark Ellison's family financial strategy document spread out between them, trying to figure out which wire I had cut. They probably thought I was bluffing. They probably thought I was just throwing a tantrum, that I would cool down, realize my duty, and call the bank to accept the debt like a good little soldier. Then, the official letters arrived. When a bank confirms fraud on a loan of that magnitude, they don't send a polite note. They send legal notices. They send intent to foreclose warnings. And because I had named names, because I had identified the perpetrators, the district attorney's office sent inquiries. That was when the tone shifted. The anger and the entitlement I had heard on the phone vanished, replaced by a frantic, high-pitched panic that flooded my digital life. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was at my standing desk, reviewing code, when my phone lit up. "Mom, Olivia, please answer." A sheriff's deputy just left a card at the door. He wants to talk to Dad. "What did you do?" "Mom, we can't have police at the house. The neighbors will see. Grace is coming home this weekend. Please, you have to stop this." "Mom, it's just money, Olivia. We can fix money." "You can't fix a ruined reputation. Do you want to destroy your sister's career before it even starts?" I stared at the messages. "Do you want to destroy your sister's career? Even in the face of a criminal investigation?" The sun still revolved around Grace. My mother wasn't worried that her husband might go to prison for forgery. She wasn't worried that I had been financially violated. She was worried that the future doctor might get splashed with mud. I didn't reply. Then came my father. His approach was different. He didn't text. He left voicemails. Long, rambling, breathless voicemails that sounded like a man trying to talk his way out of a speeding ticket, only the ticket was a felony indictment. "Liv, it's Dad. Look, I think there's been a massive miscommunication. Mark said this was a standard leveraging strategy. We didn't mean to keep you in the dark. Really, we were trying to protect you from the stress. We wanted to save the house. It's your childhood home, Liv. We did it to keep the roof over our heads. I thought you'd understand. I thought, Liv is the smart one. Liv is the strong one. She'll get it. You have to call the bank and tell them it was authorized. Just tell them you forgot. Please. They're talking about seizing the shop." I listened to the voicemail twice. I analyzed it like a threat actor's manifesto. "We were trying to protect you from the stress. It was gaslighting of the highest order. They stole my identity to protect me. They leveraged a $350,000 debt against my credit score to save the house, ignoring the fact that the debt itself was what now endangered the house. But the most painful communication came from Grace. Late that night, my phone chimed with a notification from her. It wasn't a short text. It was a wall of blue bubbles, and a stream of consciousness poured out in a panic. "Liv, I don't know what's happening. Mom is crying. Dad is throwing up in the bathroom. They say you called the police. Liv, how could you? I know you're mad about the money. I get it. I really do. But you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Med school isn't just school. It's a meat grinder. I needed the apartment to sleep. I needed the loans to survive. Mom and Dad just wanted to help me so I wouldn't crash and burn. We were all just trying to survive. I was going to pay you back. Once I'm in attending, I'll be making huge money. I would have fixed it all. But now, if I have a fraud scandal attached to my family name, the residency program could drop me. Hospitals do background checks. You're not just punishing Mom and Dad. You're killing my future. Please, Liv. Please just tell them it was a mistake. Don't burn the whole family down over a loan." I sat in the dark, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. I read her words over and over again. Pressure, survive, my future, my career. I looked for the words, "I'm sorry." I looked for, "Are you okay?" I looked for, "I can't believe we did this to you." They weren't there. Grace's message was a mirror of her entire life. It was a soliloquy about her own suffering, her own stakes, her own importance. To her, my identity theft was an inconvenience. It was a bureaucratic hurdle that I was selfishly placing in her path. She genuinely believed that her stress about medical school exams was equivalent to my stress about having a $250,000 anchor tied to my ankles. She didn't see me. Even now, standing on the edge of the abyss, she didn't see me. She only saw the resource that had stopped functioning. That was the moment the last thread of guilt snapped. For years, I had held on to a tiny, secret hope that if I just gave enough, if I sacrificed enough, eventually they would look at me and say, "Thank you, Olivia. We love you just for being you." But reading those texts, I realized that day would never come. To them, I wasn't a person to be loved. I was an asset to be liquidated, and now that the asset was fighting back, they weren't heartbroken, they were annoyed. They were panicked because the ATM had not only stopped dispensing cash but had called the cops. I felt a sudden, profound exhaustion. It wasn't physical. It was the exhaustion of carrying a load that wasn't mine for 33 years. I opened a new message window. I created a group chat with Mom, Dad, and Grace. I typed slowly, my fingers steady on the glass. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to justify myself. In the world of security, when you identify a compromised system that cannot be patched, you don't argue with it. You quarantine it. I have received your messages. I wrote, "Let me be clear. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not a family dispute. This is a federal crime involving identity theft and bank fraud. I did not sign those papers. I did not authorize that debt. I will not lie to the bank or the police to cover up a felony you committed against me." I paused. I looked at the cursor, blinking. I needed to set the final boundary. The firewall rule that would block all incoming traffic. I have retained legal counsel. My attorney is Karen Miller. She is handling all communication regarding this matter from this point forward. Do not contact me directly again. Do not come to my apartment. Do not call my work. If you do, I will file for a restraining order. This is not a negotiation. I read it one last time. It was cold. It was clinical. It was the voice of a stranger. I hit send. Then, I immediately went into the settings of my phone. Block caller Mom, block caller Dad, block caller Grace. I did the same on WhatsApp. I did the same on email, setting up a filter to route their addresses directly to a folder named Legal Archive without ever hitting my inbox. I put the phone down on the desk. The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a vacuum. I had just severed the primary connection of my life. I had just orphaned myself. My chest felt tight, a physical ache that radiated outward. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking slightly in the chair. It hurt. God, it hurt. It felt like an amputation without anesthesia. But under the pain, there was something else, a tiny, fragile pulse of something new, safety. For the first time in my life, my bank account was safe. My credit score was safe. My future was safe. They couldn't reach me. They couldn't ask me for just one more favor. They couldn't guilt me with their eyes. The line was cut. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I was 33 years old. I had lost my family. But I had regained possession of my own life. I thought about Grace's text one last time. We were all just trying to survive. "No," I whispered to the glass. "You were trying to succeed. I was the one trying to survive, and I just did." I turned off the lights in the apartment. I went to my bedroom and lay down. I didn't cry. I felt incredibly heavy, as if gravity had doubled, but my mind was clear. The emotional bank was closed. The liquidation sale was over. Tomorrow, the lawyers would take over. Tomorrow, the war would become a matter of paperwork and depositions. But tonight, the battle was internal. I had to learn how to exist in a world where I didn't have to save anyone. I had to learn who Olivia Parker was when she wasn't being useful. And that, I suspected, would be the hardest work of all. The legal process of dismantling a family is a slow, grinding machinery. It doesn't happen with the bang of a gavel. It happens in increments of paperwork, in the quiet accumulation of PDF attachments and certified mail. Over the next 5 months, my life became a series of procedural victories that felt strangely like funerals. The bank concluded its investigation. The forensic analysis of the IP logs, the deposition of the notary, and my travel records created a picture so clear that no amount of family misunderstanding could blur it. They officially designated me as a victim of identity theft. The $350,000 debt was excised from my name like a tumor. But in physics, matter is neither created nor destroyed, it just changes form. That debt didn't vanish. It boomeranged, because the funds had been dispersed to my parents' joint account, and because the loan was secured by their home. The liability snapped back to them with terrifying velocity. Without my credit score to anchor it, the interest rate spiked. The bank demanded immediate repayment or restructuring on terms my parents couldn't possibly meet. I didn't have to watch the fallout directly. Karen, my lawyer, filtered the debris for me, but I saw the outlines of the crash. The auto shop was put up for sale. The future doctor banner likely came down as the reality of legal fees set in. There were whispers of a plea deal to avoid jail time for my father, involving full restitution and probation. Grace was not spared. The investigation into the funds revealed transfers to her accounts for tuition and living expenses. While she wasn't the primary forger, she was a beneficiary of fraud. I heard through the grapevine a mutual friend from college that she had been called in for questioning by her residency program's ethics board. She didn't lose her spot, but she was placed on probation. The shining star had been dimmed. And me, I went into lockdown. I executed a hard reset on my life. I changed every password I owned, from my bank to my Netflix account. I set up multi-factor authentication on everything, using hardware keys that never left my person. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I rented a PO, box in a different zip code, and routed all my mail there. I even changed my phone number, giving the new one to only 5 people, my boss, my lawyer, and 3 friends who had nothing to do with San Antonio. The digital silence was absolute. The frantic texts, the guilt-tripping voicemails, they all hit the wall of my new defenses and dissolved. At first, the silence was terrifying. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for my phone, expecting a crisis. Is the shop okay? Does Grace need rent? The phantom limb of my responsibility ached. I had spent so long being the crutch that I didn't know how to walk without the weight. But slowly, the terror faded, replaced by a strange, hollow peace. I started to notice things about my life that I had been too busy to see. I noticed that my savings account was growing, not shrinking. I noticed that when I bought a coffee, I didn't calculate whether I could afford it. I noticed that my weekends were mine empty. Perhaps, but mine. The true test of my severance came on a Tuesday night in November. I had to drive down to Laredo for a site survey at a client's data center. The route took me straight down I-35 South, past New Braunfels, past Selma, and inevitably through San Antonio. It was 8:00 p.m. when I hit the city limits. The skyline of San Antonio rose up in the distance, the Tower of the Americas glowing against the dark sky. This was my city. This was where I learned to ride a bike. This was where I had my first kiss. This was where I learned that love was a transaction I couldn't afford. As I approached the exit for my parents' neighborhood exit 150, my foot instinctively hovered over the brake. It was a reflex. Exit here, go home. Fix it. I looked at the green sign. Exit 150, Walter Street. I could be there in 10 minutes. I could pull into the driveway. I could walk through the front door. I imagined what would happen. The house would be tense. My mother would be crying, her face swollen. My father would be sitting in his chair, looking aged and defeated. They would look up when I entered, and then the questions would start. Not, "We are sorry," not, "We were wrong," but "Why did you do this to us? Why did you humiliate us? How could you let strangers audit our lives? We just wanted to save the house. We just wanted Grace to win. Why do you hate your family?" They wouldn't ask about the theft. They would ask about the exposure. To them, the crime wasn't the forgery. The crime was the accountability. I realized then that if I took that exit, I wouldn't be walking into a reconciliation. I would be walking into a courtroom where I was the accused. I would be pulled back into the vortex of their reality, a reality where I was the villain for refusing to be the victim. My foot moved back to the accelerator. I pressed down. The engine hummed. The car sped up. I watched exit 150 blur and disappear in my rearview mirror. A physical sensation washed over me, a mix of nausea and weightlessness. It felt like the moment the plane lifts off the runway. The ground falls away. The friction is gone. I drove past the city. I drove past the memories. I didn't hate them. That was the surprise. I searched my heart for hatred, for the burning desire for revenge, but it wasn't there. There was just a profound, quiet sadness. I grieved for them. I grieved for the parents I wanted but never had. I grieved for the sister I thought I was helping. But I realized that cutting them off wasn't an act of war. It was an act of triage. In emergency medicine, you have to decide who can be saved and who cannot. You cannot save a patient who is actively trying to pull you into the fire with them. My family was the fire. And for 33 years, I had been throwing myself onto the flames to keep them warm. Now, I was walking away from the burning house. I turned on the radio. A classic rock song was playing. I hummed along, my voice quiet in the cabin of the car. I was alone on the highway, surrounded by the vast Texas darkness. I wasn't Olivia the unseen daughter anymore. I wasn't Olivia the bank. I was just Olivia. And as the lights of San Antonio faded into the distance behind me, I understood something fundamental. You cannot explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot ask for respect from people who profit from your disrespect. The only answer is silence. The only move is to leave. I kept driving south, toward the border, toward my work, toward a future that was unwritten and unpaid for by anyone but me. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I wasn't afraid of the dark. If you are listening to this, if you have followed me from the dinner table in San Antonio to the empty highway headed south, then there is a good chance you aren't just here for the drama. You are here because something in my story vibrated against a cracked part of your own life. Maybe you felt a phantom ache in your chest when I talked about being the convenient child. Maybe you flinched when I mentioned the emergency phone calls that always ended with a request for a transfer. I didn't tell you this story just to vent. I didn't document the forensic accounting of my own exploitation just to prove I was right. I told you this because I know I am not the only one. There are thousands of Olivias out there. Maybe you are one of them. You are the responsible one, the capable one, the one who has it together. You are the infrastructure of your family, the silent beam that holds up the roof while everyone else dances in the living room. And I am here to tell you something that took me 10 years, $120,000, and a near-death experience of my financial identity to learn you are in danger. It is a quiet danger. It doesn't look like a predator in the bushes. It looks like your mother crying at the kitchen table. It looks like your father's slumped shoulders. It looks like your sister's dreams. It wraps itself in the language of love, duty, and tradition. It whispers, family helps family, and we're all in this together. But if you look at the ledger, really look at it, you will see that you aren't in it together. You are in it alone, and they are standing on your shoulders. I used to think that love was about saying yes. I thought that every time I paid a bill, every time I fixed a laptop, every time I swallowed my own needs to fund their desires, I was depositing coins into a bank of affection. I thought that if I just gave enough, eventually the balance would tip, and they would see me. They would value me. They would love me, not for what I did, but for who I was. That was the lie. The truth is, when you turn yourself into a utility, people stop seeing the person. They only see the function. When you become the family ATM, they don't thank the machine for giving them cash. They just kick it when it's empty. I want you to pause and look at your own life. Look at the boundaries you have let slide. Does your phone ring only when there is a crisis? Do conversations about your life somehow always pivot back to their needs? Do you feel a knot of anxiety in your stomach when you see their names on your caller ID? Do you find yourself justifying their behavior to your friends? Oh, my mom is just stressed. My brother is just going through a hard time. If you are nodding, you are in the trap. I know what you are afraid of. You are afraid that if you say no, you will be the bad guy. You are afraid they will call you selfish. You are afraid they will cut you off. Let me tell you, they might. When I stopped the money, my family didn't try to understand. They attacked. They panicked. They tried to guilt me, then shame me, then legally destroy me. That wasn't an accident. That was a defense mechanism. When a parasite is detached from its host, it doesn't apologize. It fights to reattach. But you have to realize that being the bad guy in their story is the only way to be the hero in yours. You have the right to set limits. Read that again. You have the right to set limits without explaining them, without apologizing for them, and without earning them. You do not owe your parents your future just because they gave you a past. You do not owe your siblings your safety just because you share DNA. Your bank account is not a community chest. Your credit score is not a family asset. Your peace of mind is not a resource to be mined until it is exhausted. I know it feels impossible. I know the guilt feels like a physical weight. You think, but they need me. If I don't help, who will? Here is the hard truth. As long as you are the safety net, they will never learn to fly. Why would they? You have made it too comfortable for them to fall. My parents didn't have to worry about the shop's profitability because they had the Olivia Fund. Grace didn't have to worry about budgeting because she had the Olivia Scholarship. By saving them, I was actually crippling them. I was subsidizing their dysfunction. And in the process, I was erasing myself. I want you to conduct a test. It is a painful test, but it is necessary. It is the litmus test of conditional love. Stop the flow. The next time they ask, say no. Don't offer an excuse. Don't say, I'm broke right now. Don't say, maybe next month. Just say, I can't do that. Or, I am not able to contribute to that. Then, watch what happens. Do they say, oh, I understand. How are you doing, though? Or do they get angry? Do they get cold? Do the calls stop coming? If your relationship with your family cannot survive the word no, then you didn't have a relationship. You had a transaction. You were not a loved one. You were a service provider. And when the service stops, the customer leaves. If that realization hits you right now, if it makes your breath catch in your throat, let it hurt. Let it break your heart. Because a broken heart is better than a stolen life. You can heal from a broken heart. You can find people, friends, partners, a chosen family who will love you for your presence, not your utility. You can build a life where you are celebrated, not consumed. But you cannot heal if you are still bleeding out. Leaving is not failure. Walking away is not betrayal. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to step out of the dynamic. I am Olivia Parker. I am 33 years old. I live in a condo that I bought with my own money. I have a retirement account that no one knows about. I have weekends that are quiet. I don't have my parents. I don't have my sister. Do I miss them? Sometimes. I miss the idea of them. I miss the family I wanted them to be, but I do not miss the anxiety. I do not miss the feeling of being a tool in someone else's hand. I am free. And if you are listening to this, standing on the edge of your own decision, holding the keys to your own car, wondering if you should turn back, don't. Put the car in drive. Look at the road ahead. The rearview mirror is for checking what's behind you, not for staring at it until you crash. You are not a bank. You are not a ladder. You are a human being. Save yourself. End.